Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning and Boker Tov to those joining us from Dallas and across the U.S. Erev Tov and good evening to those of you in Israel. I'm Susan Cedars, Chair of the Dallas Partnership Together Committee, and I'm happy to welcome you today. As you're aware, as Karen was mentioning, here in Texas, we've experienced unprecedented cold weather, and the storm has brought great hardship to many in our community. We want to start by letting you know that if anyone has been impacted by the storms and power outages and are in need of assistance, or if you know of someone who has, please complete the form. There's a form that Pita just dropped in the chat box. You can download, just click on the form. It'll pop up on your computer, print it, and complete the form. Oh, it's a Survey Monkey form, so just fill that out. Also, JFNA's Emergency Committee, a volunteer body that allocates emergency funds contributed by the community to address disaster relief, has opened a national mailbox to ensure that contributions flow to communities throughout Texas and elsewhere hit by the freezing weather, allowing them to get through their immediate emergency and rebuild from this disaster. If anyone would like to contribute to the relief efforts of the Texas Federations, the link is also shared in the chat box for your access. So moving right into our wonderful program today, my husband and I moved to Dallas in 2017, and one of the first things we did when we moved here was to sign up for the Federation's community mission to Israel in 2018. It was on this trip that we first became aware of our Dallas Partnership Together relationship with the Western Galilee. The map that Pita is going to pull up in just a minute for you to look at highlights our partnership region in the Western Galilee. The purpose, oops, I just lost my notes. There we go. The purpose of Partnership Together is to connect the Jewish communities in the diaspora with regions in Israel to provide a platform for friendship, support, and understanding. While on this Federation community mission, we were able to explore our partnership region, experience its beauty and richness, and witness some of the good work resulting from our partnership. We discovered that the region is full of amazing treasures to be enjoyed, so be sure to check with us when the skies open and you're planning your next trip to Israel. We can give you some really good ideas and connections in the Western Galilee to enhance your trip. Today's program is a collaboration between Partnership Together, Dallas, Western Galilee, and the Tycher Library with the support of multiple community partners. Thank you, Anshe Torah Sisterhood, Beth Torah Book Club, Hadassah, NCJW, Shereth Israel, Temple Shalom Sisterhood, Temple Emmanuel Sisterhood, and Tiferet Israel Book Club for joining us today. A quick moment for some housekeeping details. Please make sure to keep your mic on mute when you're not speaking to minimize any interruptions. You're welcome to use the chat box throughout the program. We will be monitoring the chat box, so please add any comments or questions in the chat and they will be addressed later in the program. We welcome Sonia Meltzer, who will be guiding our conversation with Diana Bletter after Diana's presentation. Sonia teaches historical fiction at Collin College, and for the past 15 years has led the book club at Tiferet Israel. In addition, for over 12 years, Sonia has served as an active member of the Habrakadisha, as well as a member of the Tycher Library community. Now to welcome our featured guest, Diana Bletter. Diana is the author of several books, including National Jewish Book Award finalist, The Invisible Thread, a portrait of Jewish American women, published by the Jewish Publication Society. Some of you may have been with us on December 6th last year when Diana visited with us virtually and shared her insight into the beautiful stories in this book. She is also author of the novel A Remarkable Kindness and a memoir, The Mom Who Took Off on Her Motorcycle. She is the first place winner of the 2019 Moment Magazine Karma Foundation Short Fiction Contest. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Commentary, Tablet, Glamour, Jewish Fiction, the North American Review, Times of Israel, and many other publications. A Cornell University graduate and former New Yorker, Diana lives in a small beach village in the Western Galilee with her husband and her family, where she is a member of the Habrakadisha and participates in a community group with Jewish, Muslim, Druze, and Christian women. Welcome, Diana, and thank you for spending another segment of your time with us today.
Thank you. So, Pita and Karen, we're going to start with the video, correct?
Can't hear the video.
Right, we can't hear.
Karen, please restart. There's no sound. We're going to restart. Just hold on one moment, guys.
Were you not able to hear that?
No.
You can't hear it. Okay, we will try again. So
make sure you click at the bottom right before you share your screen that you're letting the video sound. There's a bottom spot to click.
We still can't hear, Karen.
Okay. Let me take over. Okay, take 3. Give me one.
Great, thank you.
A Remarkable Kindness is a complete work of fiction, but it's inspired in part by my own life. I'm a member of the burial circle in this small beach village where I've lived since 1991. During the war in 2006, one of my sons was wounded. Along with the characters in the novel, I've come to understand that being so close to death deepens my awareness of what truly matters in life. And participating in a ritual that's so ancient and so spiritual enhances the joy and wonder of just being alive.
Whoops. Well, we missed some of the video, but I think everyone got an idea of it. Peter, are you going to try again? Or that's...
Sure, I'm happy to play it again. Give me one moment. Happy to do that.
A Remarkable Kindness is a story about 4 American women who are part of a unique Jewish tradition. They are members of a burial circle, and they prepare and dress women for burial in a small beach village in northern Israel on the eve of the terrible war between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006. Their lives are intertwined, and the stories they tell are intimate, fascinating, and riveting. A Remarkable Kindness is a complete work of fiction, but it's inspired in part by my own life. I'm a member of the burial circle in this small beach village where I've lived since 1991. During the war in 2006, one of my sons was wounded. Along with the characters in the novel, I've come to understand that being so close to death deepens my awareness of what truly matters in life. And participating in a ritual that's so ancient and so spiritual enhances the joy and wonder of just being alive.
Okay, we got it. Well, thank you. I'll start with my presentation and then we'll have the PowerPoint in a minute. I wanted to thank Karen Schlossberg at the Tycher Library and Peter Solansky in the Jewish Agency Partnership Together, Dallas, Western Galilee, and Noah Friedman Epstein, my neighbor and friend here in Shavei Zion, our village, Sonia Meltzer, who will be moderating the questions after, and Susan Cedars, who's chair of the Partnership Together, Dallas, Western Galilee. First, I want to say that considering the weather where you are, I'm very grateful that all of you are here, and I hope that you all get through this challenging time. So thank you all for joining me. And I'll start a little bit with the presentation that you can pull up on the screen, Karen or Peter. It's a great way for you in Texas to get to experience traveling to the Western Galilee. And what I'll do is tell you a little bit about my life and who I am in my journey, and then talk about my novel and the writing process, and then share with you some of the real life people who inspired some of the characters in my book. And for those of you who haven't read the book, I hope this gives you a taste of what's to come and that you will read it. So we'll start with the first slide. The next slide. My paternal grandfather came from a small town in the Ukraine, what was then Russia, called Letachev, and this is a picture of a water carrier. The children in the village always made fun of the water carriers, and I like the picture because it shows where my grandparents began. 8 of my paternal grandfather's brothers and sisters moved to New York. One of them moved to what was then Palestine before Israel became a state. They worked very hard on the Lower East Side, and then I grew up, I was born in New York City, Manhattan, and I grew up in a town called Great Neck, New York on Long Island. So that's to show how far my family came. As some of you came to Dallas for different reasons from around the world. so too the Jews always are traveling. So when I was living in the very same house I grew up in Great Neck with my first husband and our 4 children, I was living in the bedroom that I grew up in with the same neon green shag carpeting. And I had gone to Israel as a teenager when I was 15 with the American Zionist Youth Foundation. And the trip really influenced me. And I thought someday I would like to come back and live there. And when the opportunity arose, many years later, I did. We had a friend who lived in Shevet Zion, and that's where we decided to move. So in the next slide, this is what Shevet Zion's train station looked like when we first moved there. Nowadays, we think of Israel as the startup nation. I felt like I had landed in the TV show Petticoat Junction. It felt really quaint and like I had gone back 30 years in time. And similar to some of the characters in my novel, I had complete culture shock. But it's a beautiful place, as you'll see from the next slide. It's right on the sea. As you can see, this is the southern end of Shevet Zion. In my novel, it's called the village of Peleg. And it was founded by Jews who came from Germany in 1938. They set up what's called a moshav, which is similar, as many of you know, to a kibbutz. That means that it's sort of like kibbutz light. It was modified. Salaries were based on how many children you had, but children lived with their parents. And it was a cooperative, and there were also private houses where we rented. And in this slide, you can see there's my, the next slide. When I landed in Shevet Zion, I knew that I was coming to the Middle East, but I wasn't really aware of how close exactly I was to Lebanon, where, as you can see in the top slide, that was a friend of mine who stood, this is the sign in Rosh Nikra, and in miles, we're closer to Beirut, that's 75 miles. Jerusalem is 127 miles. It's in kilometers in the picture. And down below is a group of, from the Schultz Family Israel educators and fellows. They came in 2014. And this program has already brought 4 groups of educators and leaders to the Western Galilee. And another group is scheduled to come by the end of 2021. It's a fabulous program. If you know of anyone who would like to join, please speak to Peter Solansky at the end of the program or another time. And this is Rosh Nikra. You can see it on the, it's not on the map, but it's farther north than Nahariya. Shevet Zion, where I live, is in between Nahariya and what's called, spelled Acre, but in Hebrew it's called Akko. And in the next slide, and that was what one of the characters in my novel says, well, we're closer to Beirut than Jerusalem. It is kind of shocking to think about. And one day, hopefully, there will be peace and we can travel to the rest of the Middle East. In the next slide, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Habrakadisha, the burial circle, and why in our village we bury men and women in coffins. Some of you might know that Israelis are not buried in coffins. Jews are buried in shrouds, and Muslims are buried in the funeral. People can see them, their bodies are covered, but their faces are exposed. This is in Akko. It was a Crusader fortress built in the 12th century. And at the time, in the 1940s, it was used by the British as a prison. The British held both common criminals and Jewish fighters. Now, this is before Israel became a state, when the British ruled the area, and the Jewish fighters were trying to oust the British. And if you've read Exodus or seen the movie, there's a scene in it where prisoners did try to escape in 1947, and the British caught most of the escaped prisoners and killed them. No settlement or village in the nearby area wanted to take these dead fighters because they were afraid of British reprisals. My village, Shevet Zion, decided to take in the bodies and bury them in our cemetery, which you saw in the video. But because the fighters were so badly mangled, it was decided that they would be placed in coffins. And to this day, we still use coffins. In my book, it was also in traditional Jewish burials, often there's no nails in coffins. In our village, there's somebody who uses a screw gun to close the coffin. But when I wrote the book, I had an image in my head of the nails banging into a coffin, the finality of it. So that I took poetic license with that. And I love the quote from Isaac Dennison, and she wrote that all sorrows can be born if they can be turned into a story. And for me, that's why I use a lot of my writing. It's to turn my experiences into stories or to moral lessons or spiritual lessons that I can grow from. And I wanted to share a little bit about some of the people who were in my book. In the next slide, you can see this was Yehudit and Shaul Sanish. They started the first dog and cat kennel in the Western Galilee, and they were inspirations for my characters, Erica and Jacob Troyerman, in my novel. And that behind them is Benny, their son. And Shaul, like in the novel, did commit suicide on Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I wanted to find some way to memorialize them and memorialize their experience. So I included them and I fictionalized it, but what they shared was all true in the novel. And when I write, I always write with a fountain pen. I learned in 5th grade, I still write fast. And I believe that for me, my creativity works best if I don't stop to correct what I'm writing or to edit. I just write the first draft by hand, and then I go back, and as I type it into my computer, I then edit it. And I started writing this novel when I stepped out of the burial house and where we prepare the bodies, and that was in 2005. And I just thought, wow, this would make a great story, because suddenly I felt like I was more alive than ever before. The sky seemed bluer, the bushes seemed greener. And because I've been a journalist for so many years, I thought this would make a great story. And I didn't know how to go about writing the story. And at first I thought I wanted to write a novel. I've written novels before, and I wondered how I could do it. But writing a whole novel seemed very daunting. So instead I said, I'll just try to write a little manageable segments. And when I write, what I'll do is I'll either set my alarm for, let's say, 30 minutes and write quickly without stopping for 30 minutes, or I'll say to myself, try to write 5 pages and just go. And that's what I did. And I came up with 4 fictional characters. One of them is named Lauren. She came from, this is in the novel, she came from Brookline, Massachusetts. And the reason she moved to Israel is because she fell in love with an Israeli doctor doing his residency, and she moved back to Israel reluctantly. And that's based on a friend of mine. This happened to her. And her friend, Emily, came to Israel after her TV chef husband divorced her. And Emily is based on my very good friend from college, whose father came from Germany and whose mother is a Southern belle. And I love that irresistible combination of 2 Jewish people from 2 different parts of the world. And then there's Aviva, who worked for the Mossad, the Jewish spy agency in Paris, and then came to Israel, where she worked as an English teacher in the novel. And finally, there's Rachel. And Rachel is inspired by a woman named Susan Levine, who actually came with me to Israel when we were both 15. And she came from Fargo, North Dakota. And her mother was featured in my first book, The Invisible Thread. She was a judge in North Dakota, a state judge. And Rachel in my book came from Wyoming and wanted to move to Israel to be part of a Jewish society. And she was very idealistic and she wanted to help. And all those 4 characters are a little bit of me in each of the characters. Mm-hmm. So I was writing the book in 2005. And then unfortunately, as you'll see in the next slide, war broke out. And this was Staff Sergeant Michael Levin. He was on vacation in America when the war broke out in 2006 between Israel and Hezbollah. And he was already in the Israeli army, which he had volunteered for. And he flew back to Israel to fight with his unit. And my oldest son, Shlomi, was a medic and the commander of his unit. And as you can see from the map, they marched in across the border to an southern Lebanese town called Eit El Shab, where Michael was mortally wounded. And my son, who was the medic, and another son tried to save him, and they couldn't, and they had to carry him out of Lebanon. And my son sustained shrapnel wounds in his legs and suffered from serious trauma from it. So out of sadness in Israel, there always has to be a way to find joy. For example, Memorial Day is the day before Independence Day. So we go from sorrow and mourning to joy. And what happened after the war, in the next slide you'll see, is that the parents of Michael, Harriet and Mark, I reached out to them, and I became close friends with them. And my husband and I took them to a memorial lookout is on Mount Adir, where they could see across the border to the village where their son was killed. And Harriet was leaning to get a better look. And since then, they started the Lone Soldier Center in Michael's memory, and thousands of soldiers from around the world have been inspired by his memory, and they've come to Israel to serve. And in fact, my youngest daughter, Libby, when she served in the army, as many of you know, boys serve for 3 years and girls serve for 2. She taught Hebrew to some of the volunteer soldiers, including soldiers from China and India. They came from around the world. And his grave in Mount Herzl Cemetery has lots of mementos, and people visited it. So out of that sorrow, they managed to find a way to honor his memory. And also out of that sorrow is ordinary life in Israel, which is surprisingly upbeat. And in the next slide, I want to show you, these are 2 women who are members of Dr. Janan Faraj Falah's women's group, which I'm a member of. And as you can see, Nasifa on the left and Naama, they're both religious women. Naama is Orthodox Jewish woman. And they came to an event that Janan sponsored. Janan is active in the Jewish Agency, by the way. She was the first Druze woman to receive a PhD in Israel. And she organizes events for women in the area. And this was one of the events. And I love this picture. I love the laughter. And I love their shared communication. And one of the women in my book, Jasmine, or Yasmin, is inspired by my friend Samia, who lives in the Arab village across the road from me. And she's featured in my novel. And so there are friendships between Arabs and Jews. And in the next slide, there are also friendships between Jews from around the world. And this is my husband, Johnny, and I at the wedding of the Mamus, that's their family, Mulau, the man, and Asifaj, the woman in her traditional gown. She also had beautiful tattoos around her neck. They came from Ethiopia, and they were airlifted out in 1990, and they came to Israel with their 8 children. And it was very difficult for them to assimilate into life in Israel. And one of their daughters, Digitu, when she was in Ethiopia, she knew when to go to school by how the shadow fell off the tree. And she went on, she came to Israel when she was about 13. She's not sure about her birth date because she was born in a red tent, and her birth certificate still says 0000. But in 2 years, she managed to do everything that an ordinary Israeli student does in 12 years. And she went on to be a cybersecurity specialist at Bank of Polim, where she met, in the next slide, you'll see where she met her husband, Shai. And that was her at their wedding. And in the previous slide, my husband and I walked her parents down the aisle. And Shai's family, the groom, his father was from Romania and his mother was from Afghanistan. And it was an incredible mix of Jews from around the world. His mother had beautiful gold embroidered robes from Afghanistan, and she was, and the Ethiopians were putting on the robes, and then the Afghanistan and the Romanian people were dancing with the Ethiopians. It was really beautiful. And it just shows this incredible historic experiment that I wanted to be part of, which is Israel. The fact that never in the history of the world has this happened, that people have gone into exile, and then thousands of years later, they came back to their homeland and they revived a language that was thousands of years old and turned it into a modern language, incorporating words for computers and things that nobody would ever have known about in the Bible. And we found our place, all of us here, and we're doing it. We're still in Israel, managing to have a democracy. And finally, in the last picture, I just wanted to share, that's our beach, and there's a rainbow. And I called my book Life is a Remarkable Kindness, because when I do the tahara, the preparation for burial of women, it's such an act of kindness, because a woman can never thank us for what we do. And it's just a way to pass on kindnesses. And I, as Lauren, the midwife, there's a midwife in the burial circle now, and she was told in the book that we are all God's hands on earth. And I really believe that. And I try to do what I can. And I'm grateful that I found a home in the Western Galilee, and I made my home in Israel, which is part of something special. And through my writing, both my journalism and my fiction, I try to share some of my joy and my wonder. So with that, I'll open up for comments and questions with Sonia moderating. And thank you all for being with me and with all of us today.
Diana, thank you so much for everything you've had to say. We did your book last month in our book club, and everyone thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm waiting for questions to come through so that we can bombard you.
Okay, I'm ready. Well, I just wanted to say that it is so wonderful to have a partnership between Dallas and Western Galilee. For us in Israel, we feel less alone, and it's a way for us to get a taste of American Jewry and its creativity and its strength, and for people in Dallas to have a sense of Israel. And I hope this gave you a taste of it so that you'll have the opportunity to come visit.
Okay. I'm going to read one of the questions from your reading group guide, because I think it's a rather interesting question.
Okay.
Number 3, for your information, Diana. Some of the characters in the novel leave America to escape the expected and familiar. Do you see this book, your book, as an American story or an Israeli story, and why? And why do you think each of the, well, that's kind of obvious, each of the characters react differently. They react differently because they are different. But do you see this as an American story in exile, like expats, or do you see this as an Israeli story about Olim?
Well, I'd be curious to hear what readers of the book say, because I feel like it is a combination. It's both, it's funny, when I'm in Israel, I'm called an Anglo-Saxon, which is very odd for me, since Anglo-Saxons, I picture Vikings, but in Israel. And when I'm in America now, I feel like I'm also partially Israeli, although when I open my mouth, before I even open my mouth to speak, people immediately talk to me in English. I still look like I'm not Israeli. So I'd be curious what people in the audience have to say, if somebody would like to comment.
I'm looking at my chat room. I haven't seen anything come up. But it's an interesting look from 2 different perspectives. And you always wonder, I mean, I am an immigrant to America. And there's part of me that is from South Africa, looking forward to America, and part of me that's in America, looking back to my past and my family's past. So it's a matter of where you stand depends on where you sit.
That's true. I think that as Jews, many of us are used to being wandering Jews and picking up and reestablishing ourselves in different places. And we take a little bit of, I like to think that I take a lot of my idealism from America, my optimism, which is a very American, I don't know if that's a South African characteristic, but it's certainly an American characteristic here to Israel.
Okay. Now, how did your friends feel about being included in the book?
Well, the people, Shaul and Yudit Senesh, who, by the way, are distant relatives of Hannah Senesh, the poet and who parachuted into enemy lines during World War II. Well, they were very honored, and the Senesh family, they were very happy that I found some way to honor their parents.
Okay. You mentioned the Isaac Dennison book, your quote, with all sorrows can be borne if they can be turned into a story. Which book does that come from?
I'm not really sure, but is one of her famous quotes, so we can look it up afterwards.
You can always ask Auntie Google.
Yes, but it is a great quote, and for me, it is really true for me if I find a way to use my writing, and that's what I teach my people I teach writing to. I always say that whatever we experience can be turned into some kind of art. Sometimes I'll do a writing workshop where I'll start with write about your kitchen table, and they have 30 minutes to write whatever they think of about their kitchen table. And from that exercise, often stories grow, or memoir, or something that is always useful. Everything can be recycled.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, really and truly, there are only a limited number of stories, but there's an unlimited way in which to tell them.
Correct.
How did you first get involved in the Habrakadisha?
That's a good question. When I moved to Israel, and I don't think I shared this yet, there are no funeral parlors in Israel. And if you ever watch a funeral on TV or on the computer that takes place in Israel, it's always outside because there are no funeral parlors. So every village has its own Habrakadisha. Chevra means company or society, and Kadisha means holy. And some people don't even say that they're members of the Habrakadisha because it's sort of like Burial Society Anonymous. I call it a burial circle because it closes the circle of life. One of the women who's currently in the burial circle is a midwife, as the character Lauren in my book is, and it is a beautiful way to, she welcomes people to the world and she says goodbye to them. And I got involved because some of the women in the village were getting old and they needed somebody to help them. So I volunteered. And at first I was very nervous, and I still do it, and I appreciate it each time. And I'm very grateful to be part of that.
Okay, now I've got a very difficult question for you. Which of your books is your favorite, and why?
Well, that reminds me of the question that my children will ask me, who is my favorite? And I'll say, I like Shlomi in a Shlomi way, and I like Ari in an Ari way. So that's the same way that I would answer that question.
And another question is, have you considered a career in politics? Well, Golda Meir had an Israeli accent like mine, so maybe there's hope. Now, so Sharon Olson says, I read Diana's interview of characters from Shtisel, and could you speak about that and her views on the success of Israeli television in the US? Do you have about that?
Okay, thank you, Sharon, for that question. When there was a break in the lockdowns in Israel, I had an opportunity to travel to Tzfat, which is in the area that you saw on the map, where they were filming, where Michael Aloni, who is the star of Shtisel, was filming his new series called The Beauty Queen of Jerusalem, if some of you read the book. So I had the opportunity to be on the set and speak to Michael Aloni and some of the stars. Be prepared to see the series. It's supposed to come out in the spring or summer of this year, and it's a wonderful series. And I think that Israeli shows like Startup Nation Creativity are very creative, and they're doing really well around the world. So thank you for that question.
Why do you think they are so successful?
I think that Israelis are known not to have any tact. So they're very honest. They say whatever comes to their minds. And I think the TV shows are also like that, very innovative, very improvisational, very imaginative, like we can do it. And whatever they set out to do, they do. So I think that's part of it.
Okay, we have another favorite question for you. You've got 2 shelves of books directly behind you.
Yes.
Do you have a favorite among those?
No,
Somebody else wanted to know, so I am Shalia here.
I'm not going to turn around, but I love all those books. They're like my children. I have so many books that I love. I can't even say off the top of my head. I'm a little bit nervous now, so I can't even think of one.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question because I'm a bibliophile too. The only room in my house that doesn't actually have books is the laundry, because I have the wall open, and anyone who's been to my home knows that there are books in every room of the house, more than one bookcase where possible. Okay, do you like to reread books?
Yes, I do. And true confession, there are a couple of books, I thought of one now called Euphoria, that I never read till the end of the book because I didn't want it to end. So I must admit, I stopped reading Harry Potter after the 4th book. I stopped reading Euphoria. I never finished The Red Tent. Don't tell me what happened because I don't want the book to end. So I just stopped and then, toward the end. And I have to say, sometimes I do read the last line of a book first. I know that's really bad, but I do that too. So those are true confessions.
And we like to make fun of her for that, but it's okay. Yeah, I'm a bibliophile, so I like to read and reread books, and I'm actually reading Harry Potter to my 2 grandchildren on opposite sides of the country. So I'm in different places with each of them. But it's very interesting because one of them is coming up with all kinds of new information about Harry Potter. And I'm going, where did you find this? Oh, she says, you just need to know where to look. So, Auntie Google will supply any information that you want.
Right. Speaking of Harry Potter, 2 things. First, they did a Yiddish translation of Harry Potter, which I heard was very good. I can read Yiddish, but I'm not fluent enough to read that. And secondly, that nobody asked this yet, but I wanted to share that speaking of TV series and books, I'm now working with the TV director, Susan Seidelman, who did the first 2 episodes of Sex and the City and the movie Desperately Seeking Susan. So we're working on a TV series that's based on an upcoming novel of mine called Red Lights, Blue City. So I will let you know when it comes out, and I will be happy to come to Dallas again on Zoom to talk about that.
Okay. Let's see. I haven't got any more questions coming through. Okay. Do you believe that life is a series of accidental turns, like Lauren does? She says, if I hadn't been standing there when David was standing there reading a report, if I had chosen to take the stairs, and my mother said, always take the stairs when you have the opportunity. If I hadn't got pregnant, would I have come to Israel? So do you believe in the accidental turns that shape our lives? Or do you think there's a master plan that we're just not aware of?
Well, in the book, there's Lauren, who believes that everything is an accident, and her best friend, Emily, who believes that everything happens for a reason. And it is really a philosophical question. And I thought about that a lot. And I think about that when I think about my son, Shlomi, and Michael Levin, because here we were 2 mothers, and we were both praying for our children's safety. And one of our prayers was answered and one wasn't. And I did write about that idea of 2 mothers praying for their sons in an article for the New York Times. And it's something that haunts me. And I guess it is a question in Judaism that still was never answered. They say Moses, the greatest, Jewish thinker and of all times, didn't have an answer to that. So I still don't know.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very interesting concept of, are our lives planned out for us and we're just observers and participants in the play of life? Or do we make the things happen? And I think it's a fascinating concept, different ways that we look at life. Now, do you have a lot of friends with different beliefs and customs, and how do you amalgamate those friendships?
Well, I practice tolerance. So as I said in my book, there's the character Jasmine, who's based on my friend Samia, who's a Muslim woman in the village, and Janan, who is Druze. Druze is, as some of you might know, is a secretive, it was an Islamic sect that broke off. So I believe that, what's the difference between, Rabbi Twersky, who just died, was asked, what's the difference between a religious person and a spiritual person? And he said, a religious person is afraid of going to hell, but a spiritual person has already been there. So that's my concept of spirituality. And I have friends with people I disagree with politically and religious, and I believe in tolerance and in agreeing to disagree. And faith is something that we can't argue about, really.
So how would you define friendship?
I define friendship by having a sense of being a soul connection and a heart connection, and the other things aren't as important. Those are just things that we might disagree about.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way to end our program. We want to thank you, Diana, for joining us, and we hope to see you at future events, and we look forward to reading more of your output. The Tycher Library is featuring more amazing authors and their books. On Monday, March the 8th at 10 a.m., Dr. Lindsay King, who is a UTG physics professor, will lead a discussion on Hannah's War by Jan Eliasberg. On Sunday, March 21st, which is exactly a month from today, Jan Eliasberg will discuss further insights into her book, Hannah's War. So we have two aspects, a commentary and the author. On April 13th, Charles Belfour will talk about his book, The Fabergé Secret. If you are not receiving the Tycher Library newsletter and you want to receive it, please email Karen Schlossberg, and I'd like Karen to put her address up in the chat. It is kschlossberg@jewishdallas.org. A Partnership Together is going to be providing programming during Israel Week 8 through 18, including programming for Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, and Yom HaAtzmaut. To learn more about Partnership Together, Dallas Western Galilee, please contact Peter Salansky, and her email address is psalansky@jewishdallas.org. We invite you to check out all future events and programming at jewishdallas.org. If anyone is interested in learning more about the Habrakadisha, call me, Sonia Meltzer, that's semeltzer@outlook.com, or Karen. We are always looking for people who wish to share in this mitzvah for which there is no thank you. Thank you for joining us, and I want to wish everybody a safe and a warm day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, Karen, do you close down?
Everyone.
Well, and again, if anybody needs any kind of help or knows that people need help, please contact the Jewish Federation. We're here to help you. We hope to see you at our upcoming book club events. Everyone be well, stay warm. It was wonderful to see you all.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Peter, Karen.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you, Susan, for the introduction and for the questions.
Very nice to see you.
Good to see you. Good to speak with you. Bye-bye.
Right, Sonia, don't go away.
I'm not going away. Stuck with me.
You want me to stay?
Sure.
Please, if you can.
Are we back to our original?
Here we go.
There we are. Well done, Sonia. Thank you, Diana. That was really beautiful.
Sonia, you were so good too. I mean, oh my gosh.
You're
I'm
very,
so
very
sorry
well
about the
done.
technical difficulties, but Baruch Hashem, it went so well. People in the chat were just really just so enthusiastic and appreciative. It was just, you were so great. So Diana, thank you so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Diana, I'm very excited to hear that there's more coming, another book, and maybe a TV series. That's wonderful.
Thank you. And I'm excited to see all of you if you